review impressions and border molding or jump into occlusion and tooth setup? All right. Border molding's all about capturing the functional depth and width of the vestibule so the final denture has a proper peripheral seal. You're shaping the impression edges to match muscle movement, right? What part of that feels fuzzy for you? Right. So think functional. You use modeling compound on the tray borders and move cheeks, lips, and tongue through function. That shapes the border for seal without overextension. If it's too long, you'll displace tissues and lose retention. If it's too short, you'll never get a good seal. A quick check for yourself. How would you spot overextension on the mandibular tray? What would you see or feel? After border molding is final impressions. You're locking in the tissue detail inside the borders you just perfected. Think sequence, border mold, trim, then wash impression. Quick check. Why don't we just use the stock tray impression as the final? Exactly. It doesn't capture the functional borders or the supporting tissues precisely. Nice job. Next time we can dig into materials and pressure control for the wash, step by step. Denture frameworks use cobalt chromium because it is rigid, lightweight, and corrosion resistant. Quick check. Why do you think cobalt chrome is preferred over gold for partial frameworks? Exactly. Cost is a big factor. Cobalt chrome is much less expensive and it's more rigid, which helps keep the framework thin and strong. Gold is heavier and pricier, though it's easier to adjust. Next, we would talk casting and porosity pitfalls. So, for casting, common issues include porosity from improper burnout or incorrect alloy handling. Gas porosity, for instance, can leave tiny voids that weaken the framework. If you see pitting after casting, what's your first thought? Yeah, that's smart. Either contamination or a burnout or casting parameter issue. That's test worthy thinking. Want me to keep dictating through casting defects or stop here? Got it. So here's the clean rundown. Porosity types include gas porosity, which comes from trapped gases during solidification, shrinkage porosity from inadequate feeding during cooling, and back pressure porosity from poor venting of the mold. Prevention is all about proper sprue design, clean alloy, correct burnout temperature, and correct casting pressure. If a framework shows localized porosity near a sprue site, what's your suspicion? Yeah, exactly. Likely sprue placement or diameter didn't allow proper metal flow. Good pick. Next category is incomplete casting. Think low casting temperature, insufficient pressure, or thin sections in the mold. Practical tip, always check the wax up thickness and sprue before investing. Okay, quick check to close the loop. If a casting comes out short on one area only, what's the most likely cause? Temperature, sprue design, or pressure? Exactly. Localized incomplete areas often point to pressure or a localized flow issue, while overall short casting leans temperature. Nicely done. Do you want me to pause here or roll straight into finishing and polishing next? Sure, finishing and polishing. You're removing nodules and sprue remnants without thinning critical areas like rests and clasp arms. Sequence matters. Course define, maintain contours, then pre-polish. Key warning. Over-polishing can round rest seats or thin clasps, reducing retention. So, quick check. Why do we protect rest seat geometry during finishing? Exactly. The rest needs a positive seat to direct forces along the long axis of the tooth, and rounding compromises support and stability. Also, watch heat during polishing. Too much heat can distort acrylic or metal components. Keep moving, light pressure, don't chase a mere finish at the expense of the fit. Ready for a last check or pause? All right. If a clasp feels springy after finishing, what's your concern? Bingo. Likely over thinned and at risk for distortion or fracture. That's a clean pass through. We can pick up next time with occlusion, or I can give you an in depth quiz. Sure. Let's step it up. Here are a few tougher questions to stretch you. First, which property of a cobalt chrome alloy allows a partial framework to be thinner yet still resist flexure? And why? You're right on the key part rigidity. Specifically, it's the high modulus of elasticity that lets it stay thin yet stiff. Now, question two. You see lots of tiny rounded voids all over a casting. Is that more consistent with gas porosity, back pressure porosity, or shrinkage porosity? Yes, spot on. Third question. One clasp arm didn't cast fully, but the rest looks fine. What's the most likely cause? Close, but not quite. A single area not filling usually points to sprue design or metal flow to that region, not overall machine pressure. On to four. During finishing, you thin a wrought wire clasp just a bit. What's the most likely clinical consequence? Take your time. That's it. Increased flexibility, but a higher risk of fatigue and permanent deformation. Last one. A framework is returned because one occlusal rest doesn't seat fully anymore. What should be your first concern? Not the first concern. First think, was the rest seat altered during finishing? Vent framework is possible, but altered rest seat anatomy is more common and more likely to be on the exam. You did well under pressure. Want to stop here and pick up with occlusion next time?